Hello, welcome. Thank you for joining our webinar, Paying Your Way, How Payments Innovation Can Fuel Gaming Expansion. My name is Joe Watkins. I'm the president of Worldpay Gaming Solutions, and I'm really proud to be accompanied by some very prestigious and knowledgeable colleagues. First, Victor Newsom, who's the Senior Vice President of Every, Greg Kirstein, VP of Business Development at PaySafe, and Alex Costello, Vice President of Government Relations at the American Gaming Association. Welcome, guys. Thanks for joining. Today, we're going to walk everyone through the state of the U.S. gaming. And for those especially looking to break into the U.S., we're going to talk about some of the complexities that can be unique to the U.S., what the payment landscape is, some unique regulatory considerations to take into account. So lots of things that our panel will be discussing today, and hopefully the information will be well received. We are aware I'm having some technical issues, and so if I appear laggy, it's not your screen. My apologies. Not sure what's going on there, but hopefully it sounds okay and is working itself out as we deal with our technical issues. And then please do input questions into the chat. We're going to be working through as many of them as we can. We have a few that were received ahead of time, and so we'll go through those first, but there is time at the end for questions. So feel free to put those in and we'll get to as many of them as possible. With that, we'll dive right in. So for our panel, the first question is, a lot of international operators are looking to expand their business into the US, given the significant growth and new regulation available in the U.S. What are some of the complexities that they should be considering as part of their expansion? Well, let's start with Alex. From a regulatory and compliance perspective, what are some of the things that they should be thinking about?
Yeah, thanks, Joe, and I appreciate you including me today. The United States is a tough market, right? Every single gaming jurisdiction is a little bit different. You might see some similarities as states come on with gaming, and particularly online. They may be looking to previous states and they may sort of cut and paste some of the legislation or regulation, but it is jurisdiction by jurisdiction. And so obviously that creates a lot of hoops to jump through. Not to advocate too much for AGA's resources, but if you do go to our website, we have a map and it's called State of Play, and you can click on each state and there will be a regulatory sort of PDF that you can access, and that will go through all of the different taxing and licensing issues, but also we have a new section that talks specifically about payments, because only a handful, a small percentage of states have really accepted digital payments into the sort of gaming world. Those are also some of the best markets to operate in, like a Pennsylvania. But it's still sort of nascent, and so you can go on there and see if digital payments are accepted by gaming regulators. So I think doing your homework and knowing that, particularly if you want to go into a couple different states, that you're going to have tailored approaches to each state based off of their regulation and what the underlying gaming statute looks like.
Yeah, it's super helpful. And the AGA is full of tremendous resources. That's a great one to shout out. Thank you, Alex. Victor, what are your thoughts in terms of the complexities facing in the U.S.?
I think Alex has a really good kind of foundation for that. So in addition to the regulatory complexities, there are literally hundreds of jurisdictions across the United States. When you look at tribal gaming and sovereign, lands, as well as then even within what you would think would be, say, Ohio, you have multiple jurisdictions for land-based gaming. And what we've seen, or I'll just speak personally, what I've seen over the last number of years, 5 years or so, a lot of folks are coming into the U.S. that were successful, say, in an online kind of venue, say in Europe, and looking to bring that same business model. So it's not just the regulatory piece, but the business model and the technology as they come into the U.S. space, and then find it's not really applicable to land-based gaming, which is where the, currently at least, the bulk of the the volume sits. There's a lot of growth in the online space, but if you're trapped there because you didn't come properly prepared, then it's kind of a red ocean right now, highly competitive for sort of an e-commerce only kind of experience. I think just kind of being planful about, do you want to try to bite off the whole omni-channel solution? What business sectors you're going after? What partners do you need? Right? How can they help you with your business strategy and so on? It's a lot. There's a lot more to it than just a lift of your model. You have to lift and shift your model into this space.
Greg, you at PaySafe just did a pretty big white paper that talked about some of these issues. You want to share some insights from that?
Yeah, so we conducted research, which has been very, well received by the market. It's, I think, the second year in a row we've done it, where we've really gone out to the market and we've interviewed a ton of different customers, segmented those customers by casual consumers, large bettors, more like VIPs, and have gone out and have really gained some research around their preferences as a consumer, and also state by state how that differs, or book to book. What we see, which I think is common, especially for European operators looking at the US, is that customers want a wide range of payment methods. You would think, especially in North America, which is a very credit and debit based society, right? APMs are still incredibly critical to operator success and conversion. Listen, as an operator, especially, I'm sure everyone is very well versed in how much the operators are spending on customer acquisition to acquire customers. So as a operator, and when you look at selecting payment vendors, having vendors that can provide optionality by payment choice, because every customer is different, right? There's some payment methods out there that are very good for a casual consumer. There are others that are very good for higher limit players. There are also other homegrown brands, like you look at Venmo in the US, which is a digital wallet. Like, consumers are used to using these funds in their everyday life. They're used to using these payment types when they go and transact at other e-commerce, types of experiences. They expect a very similar experience when going online, and when, again, credit card approval and declination rates, and we can get into that, as we go on in this panel, have improved drastically over the last 6 or 7 years. But if you go state by state, you see a very different mix of payment methods depending on when that state went live, and what are some of the challenges consumers faced in those specific states at the time. And what also has been very insightful about the research is, outside of withdrawals, we know consumers in general, they like to gravitate towards sports books, where, hey, you can take my money in 2 seconds, but it takes you days to get my money, right? So those payment methods and operators who have shown it or exemplified a certain level of credibility and speed around withdrawals is obviously incredibly insightful and important to consumers. But also what we've seen is security, right? I would say I think it was about 34% of customers, when selecting an online sportsbook in the US, they care about security. And when you have a country, for example, that has historically been, black market, and you have some, operators that are still operating there, that experience from a payments perspective also, provides a ton of friction. So when you go today and you can get, like I said, you can take your money very quickly, but the speed in which you can disperse that is incredibly important to them. So that layer of security is just, incredibly important to our consumers. So, there's a lot more that we can share. And, I encourage everyone on this call to take a look at some of the research we put together. But those are probably, if I can think of 3 things off the top of my head, that's what we've seen, especially in the US, as it relates to that demographic of customers.
Yeah, it's great insights. Yeah, so I think some other things that come to mind, the very fundamentals of payments are different in the US. So from interchange rates, they're dramatically different in the US than they are in EMEA. There's no 3DS standard in the US. And so fraud is a much larger concern for US gaming merchants, especially online. Then how do you take advantage of Durbin that's happening, and having least cost routing, and how do you get greater acceptance rates by issue or type? And you mentioned customer acquisition cost. That's a huge problem right now. And so Victor's talking about the omni-channel solutions that are available, and making customers stickier. And that's definitely true. And Greg, I've seen data that says 40% of customers are choosing where to play based on how quickly they're paid out. So you're absolutely right. Yeah. Being paid out quickly is incredibly important. But are there other things from a payments perspective, like account updating, for instance, with the networks, as an example, that can reduce or remove friction that's unnecessary using network tokens, and what those trade-offs are when you are using a network token versus a different solution? So there's so many things to be thinking about, and that's before you're realizing I need a legal opinion now, and I have to get the certification of controls and get registered with the networks, and what MCC code am I in? Because literally every single block throughout that payment experience is different in the US. And so there's a lot to consider. And I think my big piece of advice, if you are expanding your business into the US, is to get on the phone early and have payments be a significant portion of your strategy and break in, because coming too late into those conversations will leave you some unwanted surprises.
Yeah, and just to add on top of that, Joe, and Alex and Vic, they talked about state by state regulation, right? It's very different state by state, and each state has their own criteria for what's required from a compliance perspective for every operator. But if you widen that lens out for how that impacts payments, just to give some more concrete examples and context, there are some states, for example, in the US that don't allow for credit card deposits, right? So, as when selecting, and how that kind of translates back into payments, is you need to be able to work with agile payment providers who can, again, have the ability through their technology to, in one state allow you to accept credit and debit, and for other states to ban credit cards as a whole. And you brought up a very good point, Joe, around card schemes, right? In the US, given all the work that's been done around, MCC codes and creating a safe experience for customers, the car brands in the US have increased oversight over, their merchants or regulated gambling operators in the US that, we have a big business in Europe, obviously, maybe less on the acquiring side and more on the consumer side through our digital wallets and cash products. But, in Europe, and even in Canada, where I'm based, the global merchant category code is 7995 for online gambling, right? In the US, the schemes in the industry have taken a lot of steps to improve that, because, prior to 2006, the, that 7995 MCC code was blacklisted at so many different issuers across the US. So to create a better experience, we introduced new MCC codes. And why is that relevant to payments? Is because, when you move state by state, all the car brands have their own registration process that's required to, be able to accept cards in that state. And, with tight timelines and the race to being there first, so you can capitalize on customer acquisition, working with agile payment providers who understand and have the experience in the region, to be able to plan for that, to make sure you're collecting your due diligence package, your legal opinions, you're being audited by local GLI audits to satisfy card scheme regulations. Sometimes that's overlooked, like you said, Joe, and making sure you select companies with experience to make sure that you get there and you're live in day one in such a competitive market is just very different than what we see in Europe. I mean, there's obviously local legislation and local licenses that you need to obtain, but how that translates into payments and being ready and getting there quickly is just incredibly critical. So I just wanted to expand on those 2 points a little bit, just to give some.
And I think your point on experience is well placed, because it's not a rubber stamp exercise with the schemes, right? They are going back and forth on those legal opinions, and having a partner who's seen hundreds of opinions approved and what it's going to take is going to make a big difference in reducing the expense and time spent on that. Vic, it sounded like you were going to say something.
Well, I think, and it kind of leads into the broader conversation, but it's on point. I mean, we've seen entire sectors, we've had folks who had to shut down taking credit entirely in a multi-state operation because one of their states says you can't take credit, and their provider couldn't actually segment funds within, these funds came in this state under this scheme, and therefore are partitioned out of availability in a different state, right? The ability to actually have a sophisticated infrastructure that is tested in highly configurable ways, it's just not everyone can do that. So if that's going to be something, if you're maybe you're, you know, single property, single state, single whatever, maybe that's less of a risk for your business, right? But if you're looking at growth and you want a broader business footprint, these kinds of things are absolutely critical to your strategic planning. And again, I mean, you know, these things are moving targets. Technology moves. Maybe a vendor or partner today who can't do it might do it tomorrow. But you should have it on your checklist as to, here's what I'm going to need, or if I don't know what I need, here are the people I need to ask to help me know what I need, so I can have much smoother market penetration and I call it the risk of success, not the risk of failure. If I get traction and I grow, what are my risks? Because a lot of folks think about, how do I get started? But there's a lot of risk that can scale as you start moving and growing your business. And that's the wrong time to figure out you missed something.
Yeah, and then you have a lot of sunk costs that you've got to figure out how to unstuck. So, all right, this is a good transition, I think, to our next question. So, saying brick and mortar casinos have had tremendous success, garnering loyalty, driving tremendous profits, year-over-year growth, but that stickiness with customers has yet to translate to online gaming in the same way. As operators aim for market share, how can payments providers help operators drive profitability and build long-term customer loyalty while minimizing things like fraud, money laundering, and other things that they need to be considering throughout that process? So I think the question is just, how can online technology support their goals online? Who wants to go first?
Well, I can just throw one thing out there that, you know, I think is a useful, and what we've heard from regulators, both federal and state regulators, is they actually really like the idea of a digital transaction record, right? So as we're trying to expand online gaming into different states, obviously iGaming is in, you know, only 6 or 7 states, depending on how you count it. Sports betting in 36 states plus DC. Digital, you know, payments in a physical brick and mortar casino, you know, that's a small handful of states. So we've got all these different levels, but I'd say across the board, regulators like the idea of having that transparency and being able to see money in and money out as opposed to, you know, cash. And so I think there is an ability to talk about that with regulators to be able to, you know, either get your license quicker or be able to, you know, be able to really think about how you can insert yourself into a market because you have that sort of benefit. And of course, there's a number of safety benefits that come with it as well. And it's also something that we've done some focus groups on. And people, you know, American customers really like the idea of being able to see, you know, their spend, being able to manage a digital wallet. Like, that is something that's really appealing to them. And so, you know, you're able to translate that into something that, you know, somebody's going to stick with you because they know that they can find all their information in one place. And it really creates a more secure feeling for the customer as well as the regulator.
Yeah, those are great pieces of advice. Greg, what are your thoughts in terms of, you know, online?
Yeah, so listen, we know that the brick and mortar casino business in the U.S. is a very mature industry. Of course, there's technology and innovation that happens every day that make the experience better and better every time you visit. But listen, I would also argue that there are some land-based casinos who have had a lot of success online. You know, you look no further than, you know, MGM and Caesars, who have been able to create, you know, a very impactful online brand, you know, given their notoriety amongst U.S. consumers. And I think the biggest challenge, you know, for those brands and others that are trying to catch up is, you know, how do you make how do you create a seamless experience by marrying the online and the offline, right? And I'm sure Vic has a lot to say on this, so I'm not going to steal his thunder, so I'll let him kind of expand on that. But, you know, the world of, you know, we've heard a lot about cashless gaming and the emergence of it, you know, and how that kind of factors into the brick and mortar space. But when you look at it as a consumer, you know, if I'm in, you know, if I'm in Las Vegas and I'm an MGM property and I go in and, then I have a great weekend with some friends and, win some money. And then I go back to maybe, let's call it, Michigan's a bad example. Let's just say, New Jersey or that's also a bad example. Let's say Indiana, where maybe MGM doesn't have a physical property. Like, you can go and then take that experience. You want to play online casino games, or you want to bet on sports, and being able to create that unified wallet where you can, go and gamble directly at the casino and then go home and have that same experience and maybe get additional loyalty on top of that for leveraging their digital assets. I think finding a way to put all that together is something that these groups are looking at, quite closely. I would say in addition to that, from like Alex was saying, like on the online side, like to have that digital footprint on a customer, like, yeah, of course, consumers like to go and use cash, but I would also argue at the same time that, it's almost sometimes safer online in the sense where you have so much information on that customer, their spending habits, how you can potentially provide loyalty to them because you understand that ledger like Alex is referencing. So I think that's a huge part of the online side that I think, from a security and information perspective, sometimes gets overlooked because it is, card not present rather than, doing it physically in the casinos. But I think it provides a ton of, information, and, what operators can then do with that information is critical to building loyalty. So I'll let Vic jump into the cashless stuff. He knows way more than I do. I won't pretend to be smart there, but I think that's a huge piece of it as well.
No, Greg, I think this is a good. If I went first, I would have said this is a good counterpoint, because what I've seen evolving over the last, I've been in every now, this is my 10th year. What I've seen evolving over the last 5 to 7 years is almost a parallel industry, not really a part of the same industry. You have emerging rules. You have very different fraud risk profiles. Cash can't walk out the door in 2 minutes, right? You've got the ability, while you can push in real time. You may hold funds for the first 72 hours to make sure I'm legit. Things that you're not expected to be able to do when I walk into a casino, right? I need to walk into a casino. I have cash. I play. I leave. You don't have the luxury of having rules. So internal controls that are in the land-based casinos are very different. And MGM, we can talk about MGM. I won't get into too much detail. I'll just say MGM-like entities, because they are a customer, right? But what we've seen in the cashless space is an emergence from the complexity and the fragmentation and all the multi-decade sort of precedent that the regulatory framework has in land-based, building out a digital layer. And then you have these digital first companies. So you take BetMGM, they're not the same. They say they're both MGM, right? But as a consumer, is that your experience? Do you have a consolidated app where you experience all the land-based properties and the online content? And the answer is no, you don't. The rules are different for those two entities. And so that's part of the challenge that I and my team have taken, is how do we merge these in a way that from a guest perspective, it's the common brand. From a guest perspective, it's a seamless journey. And we solve all the harsh complexities and compliance elements and fraud elements behind the scenes. So you do make it that seamless journey, even though it really isn't seamless. It may be Greg and I have to partner. It may be that I have to partner with a direct competitor in order to make that happen in the land-based space. And we have to make some business rules around that. But what we've seen is, to your premise, Joe, is yes, it's a more mature market. Yes, they've been more successful. But I think the nature of the beast is we've been able to vertically align the relationship at the casino operator level in a way that's more valuable, or perceived to be more valuable to the consumer than we have in the online space. And partly because we've had in the online space so many challenges for funding and unloading and getting money in and out and changing regulations. How do you establish a really deep, meaningful connection versus having a PayPal with PayPal has the relationship with 80 merchants? So how does that merchant have the relationship when my funding source, is generic? How do I have rewards that are meaningful if I have to keep switching or changing things? So that's the part I think the industry is getting to. This is a great time. I think we've got enough precedent. We're starting to see some significant growth in the online space. The card schemes have started to get there. I've worked with them directly, especially when you look at hybrid models. I'm an omni-channel person, so I will always say, we've seen 300% higher performance from patrons who get to choose when and where they engage, how they engage, what channels they want digital, what channels they want physical. That power in their hands, that's valuable. We put power in the hands of the operators of 750 some odd land-based casino operators running, the billions through them. And you get all the data and you actually can see a better integrated experience will perform better. End of story. Like 90% every day of spend in the digital space in our footprint is repeat business. It's not customers acquired through a marketing program or incentivized to go spend money that day. It's just repeat business. They prefer it. 20% lift in time on device and spend as an average. We have anywhere from 15 to 35 actually. We see more days per month for digital customers in an omni-channel environment, and yet no attrition of cash. So when you look at customer behaviors, customers who like cash still get cash. We like 28 billion of that 40 was cash out of an ATM. But what they are transitioning is they don't want to get up from the game, go stand in line, and go get more money. That's where you have a real value. And if that interface is the same interface that I can go do a sports bet or if it's not, the jump between the two seems to have less friction because I can just seamlessly move money from the land-based account to an online account, for that brand, then it's less friction, and maybe having two apps isn't as bad. And in the future, we deep link and we make it one experience. I think we think that way, unless again, your strategy as an operator is I'm going to come in at the iGaming only. I have a niche. That's really what I want to focus. Then maybe a lot of this complexity is less of a success risk for you. All right. Maybe you don't need to worry about that so much. So I think it's important. There isn't a one size fits all, solution. And I think everything, Greg and Alex have said is really important. But if you're going to look at a bigger footprint or partner with land-based, you got to look through all that complexity is really critical. I mean, Visa and MasterCard and everybody struggle. I mean, Joe, this. Legal opinions for online gaming, no legal opinions for land-based casino because they're licensed. The rules for 7801 are not necessarily aligned with the rules for 7995, even though I could be the same person with the same card standing exactly in the same spot in a casino, right?
Yeah.
So can I jump in real quick there?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So, I think a bunch of us have referenced one of the federal statutes that's on the books, which is UGA, the Unlawful Internet Gambling Enforcement Act that went back to, as Greg said, back to 2006, which, the internet was different, banking was different, and there was no legal online, activity happening. And so I think that is something that, we're talking about fraud and all these things. Well, there's also still this huge illegal market, right? And we're just doing everything that we can to draw people from that illegal market to the legal regulated marketplace. But those folks are not following UGA, right? They are not following any of these state regulations or laws. And so, there's an inherent unfairness in that. You're going to jump through these hoops. You're going to have policies and procedures in place. You're going to need to get legal opinions. And you're going to be competing with folks who don't. And so, as an advocacy organization, we are looking at UGA to say, what could we do to make it easier for the good guys, the legal regulated entities and the payment providers that they work with to kind of ease that process, but also how can we make sure that it's actually enforced against the bad guys and we can start cracking down on that illegal marketplace, which will just mean more customers for the legal regulated market. So it's something that we think about every day. And I know all of our operators are constantly, thinking about how to draw those consumers away. I think having those payment options is a good way to sort of talk about it and see, it's just another benefit. And you can talk about the safety and security that we would offer besides, as opposed to the illegal operators that have no AML controls, have no cybersecurity controls. You're sending your financial information to who knows where. So all of that is a benefit to being in the legal regulated market, and something we should, I think, talk a lot more as an industry about.
I'm grateful you brought that up, Alex, because it's one of the things I'm most proud of that, in our work at the AGA, because the conversation with state regulators is not, do you want to have gaming in your state online? The conversation is, do you want it to be safe and legal? Because the data suggests, and Google actually shared some tremendous data with us, that in those states that are unregulated, the top searches for sports books are all the illegal market, and the volumes are the same as in the regulated states. Yeah. And so we know that they are spending their money especially there's one very large illegal sports book and casino online that is the biggest one and has the most volume. And so we want to move that to the operators that are protecting players and doing the right thing for them. Real quick, going back to the original question, I think online I agree with everybody that those who are going to really blend their marketing program, think about when Total Rewards first launched as one of the first casino marketing programs out, and then everybody has their own now. That's what drove stickiness, right? And how you moved up the tiers and how you got different experiences as a result of that. There would be benefits that you would receive. That experience online hasn't really translated yet. It seems like the one thing that people are trying to use over and over again is free play. But I think that there are items that you can do. For instance, you could say that, hey, some of these really fast payouts, we're going to have a delay like Vic talked about, unless you're at this tier. Or we're going to charge you for that payout unless you're at this tier. You can start to have benefits that impact your experience. And you're also seeing some operators like Rich Roberts and Mohegan Sun leveraging especially sunk cost, fixed cost events at the property and saying, hey, you played online, you also get those tickets to that concert in the property itself. And so leveraging those physical assets as well. But there's gift giveaways and things that we do in person as a casino operator that you never think to do online. And those are things that I think you're going to start to see as well. Surprise and delights. You have host programs already existing. So there's definitely a shift towards creating an ecosystem of experience. And I think that's going to be what's helpful. And technology that can support that experience online is I think, the answer. What on the brick and mortar side, when I think back on my days, because I grew up in business as a casino operator, right? I shifted to payments later in life. And when I think back on all the problems that I had as an operator, all of them, except your machines are too tight, right? I never win here. But after that, they all were about cash. It was the line was too long at the cage, or it took forever to get my W2G when I hit the hand paid. Or I felt unsafe walking to the parking lot, or the ATM fee was too high, or whatever it is, all related to cash. And then, you also start to do projects as an operator, realizing how much is cash on hand costing me? I've seen estimates somewhere in the neighborhood of like 10 to 12% is the cost of cash. And that was pre-interest rates being what they are now, right? You could put money in T-notes and be making a lot of money instead of it being a cost center. So that money could be used for much better purposes, right? And then you look at the drops that you have in tables and in slots and all the extra surveillance and extra security and everything that's associated with that. How much of your operation can be smoothed out if you truly embrace cashless? So I think that on both sides of it, and then none of that's to mention what Vic mentioned, which is, hey, it might be the same customer who's interested in online or in person. And so having a solution that bridges that gap for you will also create stickiness. And who did this really well was the airline industry. They've created all these programs. They've also realized how important it is to be an issuer and being the bank themselves and getting that additional data and having that personal relationship with the customer rather than having somebody else manage it. So I think there's a lot of technology and financial instruments that are going to benefit both online and in person. And hopefully we've covered a lot of ground there.
Yeah. I actually, if I could just real quick, Joe, you
Sure.
triggered, I was going to mention this, but so one, the we're seeing in the land-based space moving away from toasters to digital, direct shipping of those products. We're moving into more digital selection of gift cards. We're moving to just pushing, instead of basically like a Venmo or a Visa Direct, pushing a reward directly to the debit card that a customer already owns, right? Yep. Rather than having them get a gift card, just pushing that reward directly. There's now, it's not that the gift cards go away or disappear. It's just the toolbox has gotten much bigger, and a lot of those are directly transferable now to the online space. So to your point, exactly. The other thing is, you probably wouldn't toot your own horn, but one of the unsung heroes of guest experience enhancement is fraud tools. The ability for us to create a more seamless guest experience is directly proportional to how much back-end risk and friction we can squeeze out. So we actually, in our case, we use multiple external tools, some of them from FIS, some from others, as well as proprietary rule sets, because keep in mind, you can walk out a casino door with cash in your pocket in 2 seconds, from gaming. So they're not captive funds at all. But that concept is the same. We need to understand who you are, know your identity. I'm using multiple tools on that front. I'm using multiple fraud tools at the transaction level, all not just to reduce my risk and cost, but to actually reduce friction for the guest, right? So I just want to bring it up. Absolutely critical part of it, and been part of our success.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad you brought it up. And you're right. I don't like to use these, but I appreciate the shout out there, because we're proud of FraudSight. It's a pretty powerful tool, and it's helped with a lot of the things that you're talking about. One issue I forgot to mention in terms of how cash is a problem. Think about like bill stuffing, short play, and like all the AML issues in a physical brick and mortar location. That also goes away when you're digital. So there's just a lot of upside there. Okay, our last pre-submitted question. We have about 8 minutes. We'll give 2 or so to each panelist. But responsible gaming is deeply rooted in the gaming industry. And we've also seen some regulators get nervous around digital payments or going cashless, because is this going to create a responsible gaming problem? The AGA has a tremendous program called the Have a Game Plan campaign, encourages and supports responsible gaming. What are some best practices that can be implemented throughout the U.S. to ease regulators' concerns, and most importantly, make gaming safe and fun for all? Alex, maybe we start with you.
Sure. Well, thanks for the shout out for Have a Game Plan. Yeah, that's our campaign when it comes to sports betting, that really is sort of tailored towards consumers. But I think we have seen that regulators really respond well to it, because it's easy to use and it shows our commitment to responsible gaming. I think, we have a broader sort of responsible gaming code of conduct that applies to brick and mortar and online operators. And it's really rooted in, like you said, providing as many tools as possible. And so when you think about online gaming, I think that's where technology really, is a benefit. And you can really provide some comfort to those regulators to say time controls, setting budgets, pauses. If we're thinking about even broader technology, that I would encourage a lot of folks to get involved in, it's like working with state regulators to help their self-exclusion lists, right? These are all, technologically savvy, businesses. Is there some sort of partnership that you can engage in to help with those kinds of tools? But I do think, regulators are looking towards the industry. And if we aren't self-regulating and we aren't providing those tools and we aren't being a good partner with them, you're going to start to see really tough regulations. I mean, there's already some states that have, these really arbitrary caps on how much a consumer can spend a day through brick and mortar and online. And it's not very clear how that is, even enforceable or trackable in any real way. And so, getting ahead of things and making those technology, those tools available to customers is a really good way to not get slapped with an ugly regulation down the road.
Yeah, and to your point on that one, I mean, you're talking about New York there, and that I'll call them out, and that's statutory, and it's really hard to do. There is a way, and we've sort of figured it out, but but it's really, really hard. And then you see future states considering other things that are impossible as well. I won't call out that one because that one we're still trying to impact. But you know, it is hard and it's complex. And to your point, if we are showing and demonstrating that we're good actors in this and we're wanting what's best for the customer, ultimately, hopefully legislators will be more open to not imposing impossible tasks to us. Greg, what are your thoughts from an RG perspective?
Yeah, I would, especially compared to Europe, I would say, like, look, the beauty of the US is that a lot of responsible gaming measures have been directly baked into the regs from day one, right? If you look at New Jersey being one of the first states and how robust their regulations were, it's forced operators, especially the ones who have been here for as long as they have, to just bake those responsible gaming measures directly into their product. So you look at things like Alex mentioned, like self-exclusion, deposit limits, spending limits. Like, a lot of operators have to build that into their technology before they go live in a particular state. So, if you look at, Europe has come a long way, but it's taken a lot longer than what we've seen from the get-go in the US. Like, I'm sure a lot of European operators on this call remember when, the UK banned credit cards. I think it was about 2 years ago. Listen, the market was live for a very long time before that happened. I think some states have taken that approach more directly than others, at least to begin with, to ensure that all their consumers are, playing with funds that they do have and not funds that are on credit. Some have taken hybrid approaches, like New York, like you mentioned, that has, a $2,500 a month spend that a consumer can use on credit. And that kind of ties back into the initial point around, it ties back into the product. It ties into, picking payment providers, those who provide operators with the technology and risk rules that provide operators with the ability to identify this type of behavior, right? So, is the responsibility ultimately on the operator? Yes. But if you look at vendors and suppliers who have created very robust technology that provide operators with information to make informed decisions on responsible gaming, I think that, is something that, this particular jurisdiction in the U.S. that have, paid very close attention to these important things. And, you look at, like with all the work that Alex's organization has done, or so the AGA, and also just the responsible gaming stuff. And you see a lot of the campaigns that some of the operators have launched in coordination with that. It's an important thing here in the U.S. And I think you see that by way of product from an operator perspective. You see it, how it's baked into the regulations, and you see it, by way of, certain suppliers like most of us here have been in the space for a long time that provide useful tools for operators who abide by those and stay true to them.
Yeah, and just to add to your point, I remember in Massachusetts we were arguing over how many feet off the casino floor an ATM had to be to meet responsible gaming standards. We settled on 12 because 10 would have been driving people crazy, right? But if you think about it, other than where the physical locations of ATMs or other items like that are, there's nothing to prevent someone truly in cash from spending beyond their means. There's all kinds of access to credit card advances. They can pull ATM. They can get markers even. There's a lot of access to cash. But, even though we want them to have a game plan, really from a technology perspective, that's the only way to empower them to enforce a game plan for themselves, to before they're in the heat of the moment, be able to set a budget for themselves and to set, hey, this is how long I'm going to play, or if I'm up at this much, I'm going to leave, or that you can actually, from a technology perspective, enforce those things where cash could never quite do that. Victor, any thoughts on RG? I'm sure you have a bunch.
Yeah, yeah. No, we've supported self-exclusion for a long time, and the reality is, being able to say that someone can send me a paper form asking me not to give them any money across, roughly half the industry, yeah, that technically that works, but how practical is that? What opt-in do you get from that? And the answer is it's very low. Now, we had much more success providing operators the ability to upload a list, and it's kind of a mix. It's a banned barred list, but it can also be if they have, customers that they've tagged as problem. potentially having an issue, because it's not good for the operators either, really. So they can do exclusion, but then that's kind of them controlling your future, which not really what from a customer advocacy standpoint you'd want. So whatever he's done, and keep in mind when we say cashless, that's a really broad category. And in the context of online, people think of wallets, they think of digital accounts, but we actually you can buy a Tito ticket with a debit card, and you can send the money from your Tito ticket back to your debit card. That's an entirely cashless system. I still don't know who you are, right? So I know the debit instrument, and in fact, I regulate the debit instrument, and you could even limit yourself. We have the ability to swipe that debit instrument and tell us you want to limit it to $1,000. We still don't know who you are, but we can still let you budget your spend in advance. Clearly, in things like a wallet, the capabilities are, orders of magnitude more strong. So, and is exactly where you were going, both Alex, when you're talking about getting in front of the regulators, the industry needs to get in front of that. We actually built out an entire budget control solution so that you could either limit instruments, limit bank accounts, you could limit total amount deposited based, by number of days that you select, 3 days, 7 days, whatever, and give that to you with text alerts, email summaries, daily, weekly, monthly summaries of all your activities. So you have awareness and feedback loops, all with RG messaging. And this seems like a lot, but if you look at your banking apps, searching out your history and your behaviors, not that different. Financial management tools, not that different. By bringing that into this space, there are 3 jurisdictions so far where they had basically said, we are concerned that someone will get caught up in the moment on the gaming floor, and you're not going to be able to load your digital wallet on the floor. We'll have to geofence you on the gaming floor, drawing on precedent for online gaming, drawing on precedent of that 12-foot separation of ATM and gaming floor in Massachusetts. And we're saying, does this make sense? Why would I have a digital wallet then if it's not solving the problem, me getting up, leaving the floor, and go standing in line? I mean, you're still killing the entertainment experience, and are you really adding value and security when we've already got all these tools available? So having the tools available actually short-circuited that potential regulation change, right? Where they tried to turn a land-based operation into an online venue when that wasn't the experience you went to the land-based casino for, right? So it is very, very, very important, I think, as an industry that we have partners. We partner with operators to provide that. There are certainly regulations around rate of play, but what I like about the payment side of the industry is we can put tools directly in the hands of patrons and let them sort of be masters of their own destiny, have a game plan, and do that when calmer heads and all that takes. And at the end of the day, having a better experience because you've already planned or budgeted your trip, so you can just enjoy yourself, drives more business. It's good. It's healthy, right? That's our opinion. That's my opinion anyway. I'll speak for myself.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got a bunch of questions coming in. This is the Q&A portion. We'll have a couple minutes devoted to the questions. The first one is actually somebody smart and knew what state we were talking about in terms of Maine, considering some legislation. So I'll save us all from ourselves. And what I'll just say is that the specific item here about being able to block someone else's access to their own funds because your name is on a joint account is not something that probably is feasible from either within NACHA or within the PAN itself that's being communicated for a card transaction. So it's something that, this is a good example of what Vic was just saying, where we need to be speaking to the legislators early and show here's how we are addressing your concerns, because this is obviously born in something of well-intentioned, but it is not something that's supported by technology or the way payments work. And so that's what I'm really proud of in my role, being able to work so closely with legislators. It's something that the AGA and other associations work really closely on as well as the other panelists. So we'll leave it at that. The next question is the future of skill gaming. I'm going to subtly change this one and just ask, we're constantly seeing DFS, that carve out in UEGA. For DFS, that line gets blurry sometimes between DFS and sports betting. Any insights? And I'm going to go to you, Alex, first in terms of what you think the future might be for DFS as a game of skill in the U.S. From a regulatory perspective.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, and we're running into a lot of different, I guess what I would say, novel approaches. As sports betting is growing in the United States, more and more sort of potential new entrants into the market are thinking, how can I do this differently? And so there's and regulators really don't know how to necessarily keep up with that. And so, there's DFS, which is, pretty much a known entity. And I think most states have some regulation that addresses that. What we've seen, unfortunately, is a rise of what we call sort of faux fantasy that is essentially offering parlays, but they're doing it under the guise of it being a fantasy event, which is regulated, differently than sports betting. And it's popping up in states where they haven't legalized sports betting, but they do have legal DFS operators. And so they're operating in this sort of gray area where it looks and smells and operates pretty much just like sports betting, but people are calling it fantasy. And then you have other operators who are trying to offer futures on outcomes of matches, basically getting into the commodity trading when it comes to this. And so I think what it behooves us as an industry is to really make sure that regulators, legislators understand the differences between the different verticals and what is covered and what is not, particularly in new states, because any ambiguity allows for sort of unlicensed, unregulated folks to be able to come in and pull those customers away from the legal regulated industry.
Yeah, and the only thing I would say is, it's not the best analogy in any way, but it's the only one I've ever thought of, so I'll share it with the group. But if there was a law that said salads were illegal and burgers are legal, right? All right, well, if we take the bun and change it with lettuce and it's a lettuce wrapped burger, that's still a burger. But then if we, maybe we get one of those impossible meat things, so it's really like a vegan, right? And all right, well, that's still a burger. But what if we do a deconstructed version of it? So it's not even in the form. It's just sort of the lettuce laid with the vegan meat, with the vegan cheese. At some point, it's a salad. And I think what Alex is saying is we know in UEGA Reg G that daily fantasy sports has a carve out and it is expressly legal, right? We know that. And there's some elements that has to exist. But people are trying to figure out where's that exact line in terms of when it crosses over to being sports betting. And I think that some of the models maybe go too far. Some I think are well within their rights. But I do think that we need regulators to weigh in a little bit on where that exact line is so that folks can play nicely in the sandbox. And if you're on the wrong side of things, you can either adjust your model or face enforcement action. Greg or Vic, any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I mean, sure. I'll add. Listen, at the end of the day, it's not really for me to comment as a payments provider in terms of how that shapes out. I think at the end of the day, we have incredible controls in place, like you mentioned, Joe, very similar to Worldpay, and FIS, where we ensure that things like, while it's not regulated, a lot of these, groups have the controls in place that we see at a regulated gambling operators. They have very robust legal opinions done by lawyers with tremendous amount of experience in this space. They have very similar KYC and geolocation controls to ensure that they're playing by the rules state by state. Listen, could something happen in the future? Yeah, of course. I mean, PaySafe's been, in the space on the US side, since 2013. And we were there from the beginning of the emergence of daily fantasy sports. And, that had a very similar feel to it then as well, where, yes, it was carved out, but until, we looked at it through a larger lens, it wasn't validated to the point where I guess it was in the early 2013s. And listen, my colleague at at PaySafe, you know, is an ex-employee at DraftKings. He was there in 2015 when the AG came out and made a comment around daily fantasy sports being illegal, and us as an industry, especially on the payment side, you know, working very closely with our partners, it's important to, you know, stand by our customers and make sure that, you know, we work with them through some of that potential regulation or legislation that could be passed. At the end of the day, you know, these companies are very smart. You know, they're very tied up as it relates to having the right controls in place. And yeah, will there be emerging markets? Of course, there's always going to be disruptors that are going to try to change the status quo. And, you know, I think the ones that are doing it right out there, that I wouldn't say that again, fall maybe in the, you know, context of skill gaming, you know, are taking all the right measures to self-regulate and, you know, make sure that if something does happen down the road, they have all the right controls and infrastructure in place to be able to combat that. So, you know, I'm sure just like DFS, you know, those same emerging verticals are always looking out for bad actors and someone to come in and, you know, and, you know, do something that could potentially, you know, lead to more legislation. But hey, you know, DFS at the same time, it was, you know, it flew under the radar until it got too big to the point where people had to look at it. So I would say none of us have a crystal ball. We don't know how it's going to shake out, but I can tell you that given all the experience that we all collectively have working with state regulators, with card brands, you know, these groups, especially the ones that are growing today, are very buttoned up on that side and have very strong cases to be made for, you know, the activity in which they're engaging in. So I'll just kind of leave it at that. Vic, if you have anything to add, let me know.
No, I think you and Alex covered it. Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, I think we have just 4 minutes left. There's a bunch of questions. Unfortunately, our panel, especially myself, we like to talk, so we don't have time for many of the questions. So I'll get to the last one that we do have. What's your long-term view of gaming in the U.S.? Where do you think it's going, and sort of what's next for the industry in the U.S.? We'll start with Alex.
Yeah, that's a great one. I wish I do have my crystal ball, but I don't. You know, I think a lot of what sort of Vic was talking about as far as, you know, really having that omni-channel experience and connecting the brick and mortar to the online, I think is where we're seeing a lot of growth. You know, there was a time that our industry was very, you know, one thing would cannibalize the other. And I think time and the growth and new customer acquisition and COVID and a lot of other things have fed into seeing different, you know, those two different sides of the business as complementary, and then looking to technology and other things to try and build that connectivity even more. So I see that's where a lot of our members are going, and, you know, looking to be innovative and dynamic when they're trying to create those synergies and that sort of all-inclusive experience.
Awesome. Vic?
Yeah, I mean, we've covered the rise of the super app is kind of my mantra, you know, the ability to have this consolidated deal. I think what we didn't cover, we didn't cover things like embedded payments, reimagining the customer life cycle and customer journey, a focus on truly trying to differentiate the guest experience as vertically integrated, horizontally integrated. There's going to be several business models I think you see emerge. It isn't going to be, you know, because not everyone has the same strategy, not everyone's got the same market position. So, but I think the concept at its heart of embedded solutions within a customer journey that differentiate my brand is going to be increasingly important as we see consolidation in the market and we see maturity kind of emerge across sports wagering, iGaming, right, and digital in land-based. So anything that kind of follows in that category, I think, is meaningful and material. All in the backdrop of regulatory change and support and education, all in the backdrop of right security, fraud, identity, right? We didn't talk a lot about identity, but it's just as important as the fraud piece. Yeah. All that's going to be happening kind of in the background to enable that primary piece.
Thank you. Greg?
Yeah, I think for me, it's twofold. On the regulatory side, I think everyone will be looking out or very closely for, you know, some movement in the three big states, California, Texas, and Florida, and how that impacts the industry as a whole. Because listen, we've come a long way, but those are three states that can obviously change the landscape, the TAM, the opportunity for anyone. Just entering Florida as if you're as a single operator, if it does become a multi-operator state, that just provides an opportunity that's larger than most countries, right? So California, the same thing. So we'll keep a close eye on that. And I would say, listen, the last 8 years, or especially since 2018, since PASS was appealed, has been incredibly fast paced. I think, if you look at, operators that we service and how their behaviors change over the last couple of years, going from, hey, we just got to get the market to, now you see the importance on profitability. You see at the beginning, the way gaming stocks were traded and some of the valuations that were put on gaming stocks, it was growing quite quickly over the last couple of years. But now with a premium on profitability and seeing in how we can turn all that acquisition costs into, becoming profitable, I think it's going to change the way they think, the way they interact with, payment providers and groups like ourselves. How do they take advantage of, you mentioned, Joe, and I'll let you add to it, like the Durbin stuff that's emerging around least cost routing, and how do they, bring the cost of goods sold down to increase profitability. So I think that's, two things that I'm, definitely looking at is just future regulation in big states and how the mindset changes from an operator perspective as the market matures a little bit. And it's not a race to getting to market first and acquisition, and now it's kind of down to the fundamentals.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. My vision of the future is, first got to look at the past, right? When gaming online first happened, we were just trying to get banks and the networks to accept the transactions, and acceptance rates were very, very low. That's largely been solved. In fact, my understanding is within our ecom book at Worldpay, the MCC that has the highest acceptance rates is 7,800, right? Which is a gaming MCC for lottery. So, we've come a huge way when it comes to acceptance. Today, issues like fraud are rife and something needing to be solved and addressed in a big way systemically for gaming. But I think the future is that gaming should be just treated like any other business. We're about to release our global payments report at Worldpay, and hopefully people will have a chance to download it. There's a ton of tremendous insight in there. But one of the things is that in the US, cash is 6% of the market. People are not using cash. And yet in gaming, cash is still a huge piece of the overall pie, especially in brick and mortar locations. And, you see Visa and other networks issue rules that say, hey, you get this discount except for gaming. And having the respect of just being treated like any other business and being allowed to use all the financial tools available to yourself as a gaming operator, I think that is the future that I'm fighting for every day, and I know my fellow panelists are as well. I know we went a little over time. Thank you all for staying with us a couple minutes over. I want to thank my fellow panelists. If you do have questions, I know there were a bunch that we didn't have a chance to get to. Some members of my team will reach out and make sure that those are answered. And if we're not best placed to answer them, we'll get you in touch with someone else on the panel to answer it for you. But thank you all again for watching, and thank you for joining the panel. Have a good one, guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care, everyone.